Hello, friends. Welcome back to Weird Wednesdays. Tonight I have a thrilling episode lined up for you as we delve into the mysterious world of Bigfoot encounters. Tattooed Biker here with you, and in this video I'll be sharing 3 captivating real-life accounts straight from our viewers. But before I dive into these incredible stories, let's take a moment to remind ourselves of the awe-inspiring legend of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. For centuries, individuals from different cultures all around the world have encountered these elusive creatures in forests and remote areas. While skeptics dismiss these tales as mere folklore, the believers remain steadfast, sharing their encounters in hopes of shedding light on this enigmatic creature. So now, just kick back and enjoy the ride into the rural areas and deep woods in search of Bigfoot. Number 1, from Florida. Dear TB, I wanted to share my experience with your listeners. I've posted it in a few other forums online too. I hope that's okay. It was 1982 and I had just ended my time in the Army. After getting home, I found nothing had changed. That and my experiences in the service left me in a poor mental state. I'd loved the outdoors and camping from an early age, so I foolishly decided that camping in the Florida Everglades would give me the peace of mind that I desperately needed. After 3 days in, I'd had enough. I packed up my gear and headed out, only to realize that I'd somehow gotten myself lost. There were about 7 hours of daylight left, so I climbed the tallest tree I saw to get my bearings. The tree was pretty thin, and just as I saw the way I needed to go, I slipped down and fell from a height of about 16 feet. My knee and ankle were sprained very badly, and the pain was nearly unbearable. I limped as far as possible in the direction I needed to go, but soon I just couldn't stand the pain anymore. Finding a path leading out, I sat and started scooting backwards as best as I could. It was hard going, as the path was made of crushed shells and gravel. An hour later, and I saw a large cat come out of the bush. It slowly started towards me, much like a house cat does when it sees a bird. Feeling very vulnerable and unarmed, I knew I was in deep trouble. Each time I scooted backwards, it would lunge and sort of flop its front paws. Craziest thing I've ever seen. It was about 10 yards from me, when suddenly from my right came a rock about the size of a softball, flying horizontally like a missile. It struck the side of the cat's head so hard that, aside from literally exploding, it folded around backwards and slapped its body. I heard the crunch and saw the blood mist on impact. I swear every word of this is the absolute truth. I looked to the right and I saw him, just standing there, inside the tree line. Massive, dark hair covered except his face. It was dark, but easily human-like. We made eye contact, and I felt very calm. To this day, I can't be sure if I heard or if I just felt safe, but I heard the word inside my head. I looked back at the cat. I thought it had made a gurgling sound. I still don't know, but when I turned back, my savior was gone. I was replaying everything in my mind when I heard a crack at about 5 o'clock. As I turned to the sound, a long, thin stick came flying out of the trees, landing a few feet behind me. I never saw or heard him after the first moment, but I was positive he threw me a crutch to help me get on my feet and make it out. For years, I had held this experience to myself alone, afraid I'd be locked up if I ever told anyone. There are bad apples in every species, but I started sharing this because people need to understand that they have compassion for us, unless attacked. Signed, AC. Number 2, Wisconsin. Dear Biker, here's something strange that happened to me when I was a kid. A long time ago, LOL. I grew up in a small community in Wisconsin, northwest of Milwaukee. The landscape was an area that consisted of dairy farms with scattered woodlots and marshes. Not what you would typically think of when you hear about Sasquatch habitat. We lived on the edge of my hometown and owned about 40 acres of land, half made up of hardwoods and some ponds. Back in the early 70s, when I was 7 years old, in early summer, my dad brought home a new 4-person canvas tent so all the kids could camp out in the backyard. We're all excited and couldn't wait to use it. The first couple of times we slept in the tent were completely uneventful. Not satisfied with just sleeping in the backyard, my older brother and sister asked my parents if we could move the tent into a clearing out further in the woods. The clearing was a small, grassy, open area directly behind my parents' house. My parents thought it would be okay because in this part of Wisconsin, we really didn't have any predators to worry about. So we thought that on the first night in the woods, nothing unusual would happen. We lay on our sleeping bags, eating popcorn, listening to my brother reading scary books to us. I couldn't keep my eyes open after a while and fell fast asleep. All of a sudden, I heard a loud noise. I sat up on my sleeping bag and looked around the dark tent. The moonlight came through the tent a bit, and I immediately noticed my brother and sister weren't in there with me. I felt all around for my flashlight, but I couldn't find it. I immediately thought that my brother and sister ditched me by playing a mean joke on me. Just then, I heard the sound of footsteps outside the tent, and I thought that it might be my brother and sister coming back. Then I heard a loud sound, followed by another sound from the other side of the tent. The noises were deep and guttural, sounding like very large animals almost, like a bear making a huffing sound. But this was like nothing that I'd ever heard before, and I knew it wasn't my brother and sister. I moved to the front of the tent, which faced into the woods, to check to see if the zipper was closed, which it was. Then I heard more footsteps. It sounded like something was walking around the back of the tent. And then I heard another sound. At this point, I was absolutely terrified. This was every child's worst nightmare becoming a reality. I was trembling with fear, and I decided to run and make a break for the house. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could. Once I got it open, I bolted out as fast as I could run. As I turned around the left corner of the tent to head towards the house, I ran smack into a wall of fur and face-planted into what felt like a big hairy tree. I fell back onto the ground, stunned by the impact. I then noticed that I had a horrible taste in my mouth, and as I got a good mouthful of the hairy tree when I ran into it. I wiped my mouth with my hand and started spitting on the ground. It tasted like a sweaty, dirty, wet dog with body odor. It made me instantly want to puke. At this point, I had completely forgotten why I was running in the first place. I looked up to see what I ran into, and there in front of me stood the largest man I'd ever seen. I could clearly make out the outline of his body. He was immense, taller than a professional basketball player, and twice as wide as a linebacker. It looked like he was wearing a heavy fur coat. My mind couldn't process what I was looking at. It was so big that I must have face-planted into his lower thigh. He just stood there, completely motionless, and stared down at me. My first thought was, why is he wearing a fur coat when it's so warm outside? I then realized that this man might be meaning to harm me. I felt terrified and remembered why I was running. I jumped to my feet and started sprinting for the house. I screamed the whole way, thinking this huge man was right behind me and was about to grab me. When I got to the back door of the house, I ran through the door and locked it, and then ran into my parents' room, screaming. I tried to tell my parents about the big man, but I could hardly get anything out because I was crying so hard. My parents had a look of panic on their faces and immediately asked where my brother and sister were. My parents found them sitting in the kitchen, eating a snack, and they didn't know what the commotion was all about. They told my parents that they heard some noises and got scared, so they ditched me and left me in the tent because I was sleeping. They just figured that I'd be safe. My parents were furious with them. I started to calm down and told my parents everything that happened. They convinced me that I must have been dreaming and just imagined everything. So being young, I bought their explanation and put the whole scary incident out of my mind. However, my parents must have somewhat believed my story because the next day the tent came down and we were never allowed to camp by ourselves ever again. Signed M. Number 3, Montana. Biker, here's my story. I've posted it before and sent it to other channels, but I thought your listeners might have some insight. If you use it, let me know. Thanks. I was a cop for over 20 years, which kind of brings me to what I experienced last year in Montana. As a cop, I approach everything with open-minded cynicism. In other words, I like evidence. I want to see it, touch it, feel it, test it, and then make my decision. I retired a few years ago, and I decided that I needed a second career. I taught school for a single semester and really didn't like it. On a fluke, my best friend and competitive shooting buddy said, "Let's go to truck driving school." And so we did. We drove as a team and spent all of last winter in the Mountain States, running from Phoenix, Arizona, near where I live, to Shelby, Montana. We used to overnight in Barretts, Montana, at a Sinclair station with a cafe, a small store, and a parking for about 20 semis. It was a regular stop for us, so I was pretty familiar with the area. We stopped this night, and I was in the driver's seat. My buddy was sitting in the lower bunk in the sleeper. We had a movie on the DVD player, and I was half paying attention to that and half paying attention to my laptop when I caught some movement past my driver's window. Bear in mind, this is a small facility, and it's about 100 yards from the freeway, but generally surrounded by a large field with 3 to 4 foot tall grass and a thicket that goes right into the foothills and then the mountains. I looked in the mirror and saw the biggest presumed man that I'd ever seen step behind my trailer, which was about 70 feet behind me. I yelled out, "Jesus, that's the biggest MFer I've ever seen. Damn." My buddy popped up and looked out the passenger mirror. It walked between the space between the rear of our trailer and a truck that was parked next to us. I didn't think any more of it for a while, but then realized that when I caught the movement next to me, the head of the guy was nearly at my shoulder level, which was 10 feet off the ground. I was in my 2019 Freightliner, Cascadia tractor. The bottom of the window line of my door is 9.5 feet from ground level. My cop brain went into assessment mode, and I thought, it couldn't have been that tall. There must have been a shadow casting on my window. I wasn't even considering something like a Sasquatch. I was tired, and I put it out of my mind. I finished up, and my partner and I went back to our bunks and killed the TV. The only noise was from my heater running. I fell into a very light sleep, which was unusual because I usually sleep like a baby. I'm totally comfortable in my truck, but not on this night. It's like I felt like I was hovering between sleep and wakefulness. Around midnight, I really had to pee since the cafe was already closed by 9 p.m. I climbed out of the passenger side of my tractor. For some reason, I felt like I was being hunted or watched. Maybe not actively hunted like prey, but I was definitely aware of something predatory, being aware of me. I've been hunted by criminals and I've been around predatory animals, but I've never felt quite like this before. I finished quickly and looked around and scanned the grassy field in the quarter moonlight and had a deep down feeling that I shouldn't move toward that field. My instincts signaled that danger existed. I got back into the truck and locked the door. I felt like there was something out there that was dangerous, but only if I did something to trigger an aggressive response. I got back into my bunk and made sure that my Glock 10 pistol was in the cubby by my head. Being a retired police officer, I could legally carry in all 50 states, but I also made sure 2 magazines were close to hand as well. I tried to put it out of my mind and listen to a podcast while trying to go back to sleep. I slept a little, but I still had this sense of foreboding. At 3 a.m., I bolted upright, reaching for my Glock. I saw it, whatever it was, go by the front of the truck. This time in the space between the building and my truck. I moved out of my bunk to the passenger side window and only caught a faint and fading shadow, moving into the darkness out of the faint glow of the low sodium lighting on the building some 75 yards away. There was no way I was going back to sleep now. I got my coffee maker and started a pot of coffee and got dressed. I still had 90 minutes on my electronic log before I could go back on duty and drive us out of there. But all I wanted to do was leave, ASAP. I kept looking up the windows of the truck, but I didn't see anything else. The sun started coming up, and with the light I could feel the sense of foreboding retreat. I could see all around the truck and a few other trucks, parked in the lot and out into the grass field and up to the building. My buddy asked why I was up so early. I told him what I'd felt all night, and he quietly just said, "Me too." When the sun was finally up, I walked all around the places where I'd seen it. I was using my cop brain again and realized that the hard-packed gravel would hold no tracks, especially as cold as it was. I walked to the edge of the grass field and there was a trail. It was a game trail where I'm sure deer had moved through, but there were no footprints visible. When the cafe opened for breakfast, my buddy and I went in to eat. We tried to figure out what we'd experienced and seen. I'm firmly convinced that I saw a Sasquatch. I took the known and the unknown and the puzzle pieces and put them into one logical assumption that could be made. At any rate, we decided to put a day of driving between us and Barrett's and get to a larger truck stop or another terminal. And there it is. All I have for you tonight. Thanks for joining me on this little adventure into the cryptid unknown. If you enjoyed the content, please take a moment to like the video and consider subscribing. It's completely free and it really helps out the channel. So thanks again. Stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker.